I was halfway through reviewing the quarterly sales data when Mason stormed into my office. No knock, no courtesy, just a loud, deliberate entrance meant to rattle. Typical. "Elena," he barked, tossing a file onto my desk. "We need to talk now." I glanced at the folder, then at the man I'd worked under for the last 4 years. Mason Reed, the kind of man who never looked twice at women in the office unless he needed coffee or someone to organize his calendar. He liked power, and more than that, he liked reminding others that he had it. Still, I stayed calm. I always did. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he loomed. "The board's decided to restructure the leadership team. We're moving in a different direction. And frankly, we need people who can lead, not just follow spreadsheets." I blinked, stunned for half a second. "You're firing me?" He smirked like he just sunk a game-winning shot. "Let's not be dramatic. We're releasing you from your position effective immediately. No warning, no performance review, and certainly no recognition for the fact that my department had just delivered the highest revenue growth in 3 years." "I see," I said quietly. "May I ask why?" His tone was clipped. "You lack vision. You manage tasks, not people. And let's be honest, this industry, it needs strong leadership, assertiveness, confidence, traits you haven't exactly demonstrated." There it was, not even veiled. A dig at my gender wrapped in buzzwords and corporate fluff. He didn't see me as a leader, not because I hadn't delivered, but because I didn't fit his outdated mold. "I understand," I said, my voice steady, neutral. Mason narrowed his eyes, clearly thrown off by my composure. He expected outrage, maybe even tears. But I'd learned long ago how to control my emotions in boardrooms full of egos. "I'll need your badge and company laptop by the end of the day," he added. "It will disable your access by 5 p.m. HR has. Your severance details." I nodded and stood, extending my hand. "Thank you, Mason. I appreciate the clarity." He hesitated but shook my hand. "Good luck out there." As he turned and walked out, satisfied with his little coup, I sat back down and exhaled slowly. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't quicken. In fact, I felt lighter. Because what Mason didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that I wasn't just a department head. 2 weeks ago, something changed, something big, and I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. My father smiling proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony on the day he opened the company's first regional office, the same company Mason had just released me from. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame. "You told me to wait, Dad. Wait until the time was right." I stood and began packing my things. I didn't take much. Just a few personal items, a mug my team gave me last Christmas, and a stack of old notebooks filled with ideas that had never made it past Mason's desk. Outside, the office buzzed with quiet curiosity. A few coworkers gave me sympathetic glances. Others avoided eye contact. No one asked questions, but I saw the thoughts on their faces. Did she get fired? What did she do wrong? I left the building with a small, polite smile and no fanfare. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt the weight of 15 years inside that company slip off my shoulders. They thought they'd ended my career, but what they'd actually done was give me the green light. I reached for my phone and texted a single message to my lawyer. "It's time. Prepare everything." The reply came back almost instantly. "Understood. Shareholder meeting can be scheduled within 5 business days." I looked back at the glass building, glinting in the sun. Mason thought this was over, but he had no idea what was coming. The next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as their majority shareholder. And the smile I wore that day would be real. 2 weeks earlier, I had sat in the quiet, wood-paneled office of my family's attorney, staring at a document I wasn't allowed to open until the clock struck 12 on my 30th birthday. My father had always loved theatrics. He said it made serious things feel significant, and this apparently was one of them. "Elena, Mr. James Harrington, our longtime family lawyer, had said with a warm, fatherly tone, "Your father left very clear instructions. You're not to open this envelope until your 30th birthday, not a day before." I had smiled politely, half curious, half amused. "What is it? Some kind of delayed birthday card?" He gave me a look that told me he knew, and that he wasn't about to spoil the surprise. "Your father was a man of vision," he said instead. "And he trusted you more than anyone." That sentence stayed with me in the days that followed. My father, the founder and former CEO of the very feish company that had just let me go without ceremony, had always believed in foresight, in planning ahead, and he believed in me. When he passed away 5 years ago, the company changed. It became colder, more calculated, less about the people, and more about the numbers. Mason had joined shortly after, charming the board, flexing his MBA, and slowly dismantling the culture my father had built. I'd stayed, thinking I could protect what remained. But now I realized my father had known something like this might happen, and he'd prepared for it. On the morning of my birthday, I opened the envelope alone, sitting in the same spot where he used to read the paper every Sunday, sunlight streaming through the window, a quiet warmth in the air. Inside was a letter and a formal document with embossed seals. I unfolded the letter first. It was handwritten in my father's neat script. Elena, if you're reading this, you've turned 30, and that means you're ready. I never doubted it. Not for a second. You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the recognition. I saw it even when you thought I didn't. I saw the sacrifices, the late nights, the integrity no one else noticed. I also saw how the company changed after I left, and I knew there might come a time when you'd need more than a seat at the table. So, I gave you the table. I paused, blinking hard. My hands trembled slightly as I turned to the document behind the letter. It was a trust agreement, filed and notarized. According to the trust, 90% of the company shares my father had retained when he stepped down had been placed under my name, held until I turned 30 with full voting rights activated immediately. 90%. I read it 3 times, then once more just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just a shareholder. I was the majority owner, the controlling shareholder. My entire body buzzed with disbelief, adrenaline, and something else. Power. Quiet, measured, undeniable power. I called Harrington immediately. Is this real? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Yes, he replied simply. Your father structured the trust to avoid public filings. It was airtight. The board has no idea, unless you choose to tell them. Why didn't he activate it sooner? He wanted you to experience the company on your own terms first, to see who would reveal themselves, to decide if you wanted it before you used it. That line hit me hard. I'd spent years being underestimated, overlooked, talked over in meetings. I'd watched Mason get praised for ideas I'd quietly suggested, watched male colleagues rise faster despite doing less. I'd smiled through it all, thinking patience and hard work would pay off. Now I realized it hadn't been time that was missing. It was leverage. And suddenly, I had it. I scheduled a follow-up with Harrington for the next day. Let's talk about what comes next, I said. He didn't miss a beat. We'll prepare the documents to call for a shareholders meeting. We'll notify the board once everything's ready. Don't notify them yet, I said. Not until I give the word. There was a pause on the line. Elena, may I ask what you're planning? I looked out the window of my apartment, watching the traffic roll by. People rushing, unaware that everything was about to change. I'm planning to walk into that boardroom, I said calmly, and show them exactly who they tried to fire. I didn't show up for the mandatory exit interview. HR called twice, then emailed. I ignored them both. Instead, I sat in the quiet corner booth of a discreet downtown cafe, sipping a flat white while Harrington reviewed the final draft of the shareholder meeting request. It was official now. On paper, I held 90% of the company's voting power, a legal and financial reality Mason would never have seen coming. You sure you're ready? Harrington asked, adjusting his glasses as he slid the documents across the table. Once you submit this, you'll be throwing a grenade into their boardroom. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. They pulled the pin the moment they fired me. He gave a small nod. Fair enough. The documents were simple, as most powerful things often are. A formal notice of a special shareholder meeting with a single agenda item, leadership review and appointment of new executive management. Mason wouldn't be expecting it. That was the point. His entire style was built on control through confidence. He bulldozed meetings with jargon, steamrolled quieter voices, and weaponized charm when needed. The board, mostly older men who liked his bravado, had let him run unchecked for too long. They'd soon discover how fragile that kind of power really was. I'll serve them notice Friday morning, Harrington continued. The meeting will be set for Tuesday. That gives them 2 business days to panic. I couldn't help but smile. Perfect. That afternoon, I sat down with Caroline Winters, the trustee who had managed the shares since my father's passing. She was sharp, discreet, and had a memory like steel. "I've watched that man dismantle your father's legacy brick by brick," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "You don't owe him politeness." Inside the folder was everything I'd need for Tuesday. Ownership certificates, voting records, and a detailed summary of company performance under Mason's leadership, declining employee satisfaction scores, rising turnover, overspending on executive perks, and a flattening revenue trajectory despite a growing market. "He's been hiding under inflated projections," Caroline said flatly. "If this continues, he'll drive the company into the ground within 2 years." I nodded, absorbing every word. "I'll let the numbers speak for themselves." As I left her office, I walked past the mural in the hallway, an oil painting of my father standing in front of the first company headquarters. He was younger in the painting than I ever remembered him in life. His hand rested on the shoulder of a small girl in a red dress. Me. He believed in legacy and in people, and even though he wasn't here anymore, I could still feel his hand on my shoulder. By Monday morning, the buzz around my sudden disappearance had turned into full-blown rumors. I got texts from former colleagues. "What happened? Did you quit?" "Mason's acting like nothing happened, but HR is weirdly tight-lipped. Whatever you did, I hope you're okay." I didn't respond. Not yet. The silence was part of the plan. I wanted Mason confident, certain he'd erased me from the story. Let him play king a little longer. Let him underestimate me one last time. That evening, I stood in front of my mirror, trying on the navy suit I'd bought for special occasions but never worn. It was sharp, tailored, clean, the kind of outfit you wear when you walk into a room not to ask for power, but to own it. I practiced what I'd say. Not a speech, just a few lines, precise, measured, undeniable. The truth would do most of the work for me. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and cool. The city bustled as usual, unaware that inside one boardroom, everything was about to change. I arrived 10 minutes early, walking past the receptionist with quiet confidence. She did a double take, but didn't stop me. Upstairs, the boardroom lights were already on. I could see movement through the frosted glass. Harrington met me by the elevators, his expression unreadable but calm. "They're in there," he said. "Mason's already speaking. He thinks this is just another quarterly strategy review. Not for long." I took a slow breath, smoothed the front of my jacket, and stepped forward. The door to the boardroom opened with a soft click. Heads turned, conversation stilled. Mason mid-sentence froze when he saw me. "Elena," he said, eyebrows arching. "This meeting is for board members only." I smiled politely, setting the ownership documents on the table. "Exactly." Then I took my seat at the head of the table. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Mason stared at me from the far end of the long oak table, confusion flickering across his face, followed by disbelief. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to place me back in the box he thought he'd locked me in last week. "Elena," he said again, voice sharp now. "This is a board meeting. As I already mentioned, employees are not permitted." "I'm not here as an employee," I said calmly. "I'm here as the majority shareholder." That one sentence shifted the entire energy of the room. Board members glanced at one another, some stiffening, others sitting forward with interest. One of them, William Dalton, who had been with the company since my father's days, looked down at the document I'd placed in front of him, then back up at me with raised eyebrows. "Is this accurate?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "It is," I replied. 90% of the company's shares were transferred to me through a family trust when I turned 30. All paperwork is in order, filed, notarized, and submitted in accordance with corporate governance. Mason looked from me to Harrington, who was calmly unfolding a copy of the ownership certificate and handing it to the board secretary. "You can't be serious," Mason scoffed, his voice rising. "This is absurd." "Why would your father?" "Because he trusted me," I interrupted, "and because he knew exactly what this company would become without oversight." The room was still again. Everyone knew what I meant, even if I didn't say it outright. Since my father's death, Mason had turned the culture toxic. He rewarded loyalty over competence, appearance over results, and the numbers had started to show it. "Let's get to the point," I continued, opening the second folder I'd brought. "As majority shareholder, I've called this special meeting to review the current executive leadership including the position of Chief Executive Officer. Mason stood now, his face flushed. This is a coup, a personal vendetta. You think you can waltz in here? I'm not asking, I said, finally raising my voice just enough to command the room. I'm exercising my rights. Then I slid the financial report across the table. Let's talk about performance. I didn't need theatrics, the numbers spoke for themselves. Employee satisfaction down 38% in 2 years. Turnover in key departments up 47%. 3 highly credible discrimination complaints under HR review. Flat revenue growth in a market that was booming. I've compiled testimony from department heads, employee surveys, and financial audits. I've also documented misuse of company funds, unauthorized travel, excessive executive bonuses, and misleading investor reports. I glanced at Mason. All signed off under your leadership. Board members began flipping through the pages. William Dalton looked genuinely disturbed. The CFO, who had sat quietly until now, leaned over to whisper something to the general counsel, who immediately began typing on his tablet. Mason's jaw clenched. You're twisting data to make your little revenge fantasy look legitimate. I don't need to twist anything, I said. I have evidence. You relied on the assumption that no one powerful enough would ever question you. That assumption ends today. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Effective immediately, I said, pulling out the final document. I am submitting a motion to remove Mason Reed as CEO of this company. As majority shareholder, my vote is sufficient to carry the motion. The board secretary looked stunned. You don't need a second vote. I own 90%, I said simply. A majority by any definition. William Dalton cleared his throat. In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands. Effective upon completion of documentation. Mason slammed a hand on the table. You can't do this. I already did. Security didn't need to be called. Mason didn't resist, but as he stormed out, his face a twisted mix of rage and disbelief, I noticed something remarkable. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small. Once the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled slowly and turned to face the rest of the board. This company deserves better, I said. So do its people. And starting today, that's exactly what they're going to get. William Dalton nodded slowly, a faint smile forming. Welcome back, Elena. By the end of the week, Mason's nameplate had been removed from the CEO's office door. I didn't move into the office immediately. I didn't need the symbolism of a bigger desk to confirm my position. I had something more important to do first. Rebuild the soul of the company my father started. The Monday following the shareholders' meeting, I called an all-hands staff meeting in the main conference hall. The same space where Mason had once paraded sales projections like war medals and handed out empty praise to the same handful of executives over and over again. But this time the energy was different. Curious, hesitant, hopeful. Employees filed in slowly, murmuring among themselves. The front rows were empty, as if no one wanted to seem too eager. Some looked nervous, others suspicious. They'd been burned before. I stood alone at the front of the room, holding no notes, no slides, just my truth. Some of you know me, I began. Some of you only know what you've been told. But let me start by saying this. I didn't come here to take power. I came here to restore trust. A few heads tilted. People were listening. For years, this company ran on the strength of its people, on your ideas, your late nights, your belief that what we were building mattered, and somewhere along the way that got lost. I paused, letting the silence fill the room. I was fired last week, I said, smiling faintly. Told I wasn't what this company needed, that I lacked the leadership to take us into the future. A few people chuckled nervously at first, but the nose. Tension began to shift. My honesty was disarming them. I didn't fight back. Not then, because I knew something Mason didn't. That leadership isn't about volume or vanity. It's about vision and respect and lifting the people who actually do the work. I looked out over the crowd, locking eyes with a few familiar faces. Engineers I'd worked alongside for years. Assistants who were always overlooked. Junior analysts who had been stuck under layers of corporate ego. Starting today, everything changes. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something radical. I listened. I met with department heads, team leads, interns, receptionists, custodial staff. I asked what wasn't working. I asked what they needed. I asked who they thought deserved more than they were getting. And then I acted. I promoted Maya Thompson from the customer service team to head of client experience, a role she'd unofficially been doing for a year while her actual manager took credit for every success. I brought back Kevin Harper, a brilliant product developer who had resigned after being repeatedly passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified men. I restructured HR entirely. The complaints that had gathered dust in forgotten folders, I read every single one. Several mid-level managers were quietly let go within the first week. People who had cultivated cultures of fear and favoritism under Mason's watch. Then I launched something my father had once dreamed of, the People First Initiative, a new internal program to recognize innovation, reward collaboration, and promote equity, no matter the job title. No more whisper networks, no more glass ceilings, just good people doing great work and finally getting credit for it. Late one evening, I walked the halls of the office alone. The energy was different now. Softer, brighter. The break room had laughter again. People were staying late because they wanted to, not because they feared what would happen if they didn't. Desks were decorated again. Photos of families, plants, personality, things that had slowly disappeared under Mason's reign. In one quiet hallway, I passed a whiteboard near the engineering bullpen. Someone had scrawled in blue marker. She came back. 3 simple words underlined twice. I stood there a moment reading it over and over. Not she took over, not she fired Mason. She came back. That mattered more than any title I now held. The following week, I finally moved into the CEO's office. Not because I needed the space, but because it was time. The nameplate was new. Sleek brushed steel with simple, elegant lettering. Elena Reed, Chief Executive Officer. I didn't bring much with me, just one framed photo. My father and I on the company's opening day, both smiling, both hopeful. I placed it on the corner of the desk and sat down, not with a sense of conquest, but of continuation. This wasn't just my company now. It was my responsibility, and I intended to honor it. It was exactly 1 year to the day since I'd been fired. 12 months since I walked out of this building with a cardboard box and a polite smile, dismissed as not what the company needed. 12 months since Mason had stripped me of my title, unaware that I held something far more powerful. And now, as I stood in front of the same glass doors, this time in a tailored suit, a sleek leather folder under my arm, and the full weight of the company's future resting on my shoulders, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not triumph, just peace. I nodded to the front desk receptionist, who now stood the moment I entered. "Morning, Miss Reed." "Elena, please," I said with a smile. "We're all on the same team." The elevators chimed softly as I rode to the top floor, what used to be Mason's domain. Now it was mine, but I hadn't remodeled it for show. I kept the original walnut desk, the same broad windows overlooking the city. What changed were the photos on the walls, images of our employees, of team retreats, of product launches led by names that had too often gone unrecognized. And on the far wall, directly behind my chair, hung a large portrait of my father, not as a monument to him, but as a reminder to me. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began reviewing the quarterly report. It was our strongest quarter in 5 years. Customer satisfaction up 23%. Employee retention up 41%. Revenue breaking records. But what mattered more was how we did it. Ethically, collaboratively, transparently. The company culture had shifted. People no longer whispered complaints over coffee. They spoke freely and were actually heard. Feedback loops were open. Diversity and leadership had doubled. We didn't just bring good people in. We finally gave them a place to grow. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I said. It was Maya Thompson, now the head of client experience. Her eyes sparkled even behind her glasses. "You ready?" she asked. "They're waiting in the conference room." I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. Let's do it. The boardroom looked different now, too. Not in decor, but in presence. For the first time in company history, half the board were women. Several members were under 40. They brought new perspectives, asked harder questions, and made better decisions. At the center of the table sat Richard Hayes, one of our new strategic advisors. Brilliant mind, decent heart, the kind of person my father would have trusted. "Before we begin," Richard said, gesturing toward me, "Elena has a few words." I hadn't planned to speak, but standing there with every eye on me, not in judgment, but in respect, I realized something. This was the moment my father had prepared me for. "I want to thank you all," I said, "for believing in change, for making hard decisions when easy ones would have been safer, and for helping me rebuild a company that puts people before power." I paused, letting the words settle. "Someone once told me I lacked leadership," I continued, "but leadership isn't about volume or title. It's about vision, accountability, and the courage to do what's right, especially when it's inconvenient." I smiled, not for show, but for real. My father built this company with those values. I'm proud to say we're finally living up to them again. A quiet beat, then applause. Not thunderous, just warm, genuine, the kind that stays with you. That afternoon, I took the long way back to my office, walking through each department, the way I used to when I was just another face in the crowd. I stopped to check in with teams, to laugh with developers, to high-five marketing interns who just pulled off their first big campaign. In the break room, someone had baked cupcakes for an intern's last day. I took one, sat down among them, and talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. Because this wasn't just a company. It was a place where people felt they belonged, and that, more than stock prices or titles or revenge, was the real victory. Looking back on that year, I learned the deepest truth my father ever left me. Real power isn't inherited in shares or seized in boardrooms. It's earned in silence, through patience, integrity, and the quiet refusal to become what they expect. Mason never saw me because he only looked for mirrors of himself. The world told me to shout louder, fight dirtier, or cry victim. I chose none of those. I waited, prepared, and struck only when the truth could speak for itself. That single choice taught me that revenge is hollow, but justice timed perfectly is healing. True leadership isn't proving them wrong with noise. It's proving yourself right with results that no one can deny. The company is thriving now, not because I won, but because I finally removed the fear that was choking everyone else. The greatest inheritance wasn't 90% of the stock. It was the reminder that dignity, kept long enough, becomes unstoppable.
My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning, and I picked it up expecting maybe a grocery list reminder or a funny meme from my sister. Instead, I saw a message from Brandon, my husband of 10 years. The words on the screen made my blood run cold. "I don't love you anymore. I want a divorce. All communication goes through my attorney from now on." That was it. No phone call, no conversation, no explanation. Just 23 words that obliterated a decade of my life. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. Brandon was supposed to be at his office downtown, buried in financial reports like always. We'd had breakfast together that morning. He'd kissed my forehead before leaving. And now this. I tried calling him immediately. Straight to voicemail. I sent 3 texts asking what the hell was going on. Read receipts showed he'd seen them, but no response came. My confusion spiraled into full panic, then transformed into something sharper. Something told me this wasn't just a sudden decision. The coldness of that text, the immediate lawyer redirect, the complete radio silence. This felt calculated, rehearsed, deliberate. So I did exactly what he told me to do. I called his lawyer. The phone rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered. "Marcus Bennett speaking. How may I help you?" I forced myself to breathe normally and speak clearly. "Marcus, this is Emma. Brandon just texted me that he wants a divorce and told me everything goes through you. You're his attorney, correct?" The silence that followed lasted way too long. I could hear him breathing on the other end, and then he let out this sharp exhale like someone had just punched him in the stomach. "Mrs. Carter," he said, and his entire tone had changed, suddenly tight with tension that hadn't been there seconds before. "Are you telling me Brandon has already filed for divorce?" A cold sensation crept down my spine. Why would he ask me that? Shouldn't he already know? "I have no idea if he's filed anything," I said slowly. "All I got was a text message saying it's over and that I need to go through you for everything." Another pause, and then suddenly Marcus's voice exploded. "God damn it, Brandon, you absolute idiot!" He shouted, but not at me. I heard papers rustling violently, a chair scraping across the floor, footsteps pacing. "Listen to me very carefully, Emma," Marcus said, his voice now low and urgent. Have you signed any documents? Anything at all? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. No, nothing. Just received the text maybe 10 minutes ago. Good. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And whatever you do, don't talk to Brandon directly. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. What's going on? Why are you freaking out? I heard a door slam on his end, then muffled voices arguing in the background. When Marcus spoke again, his words came out fast and rushed. Emma, I'm violating about 60 different ethics rules by telling you this, but your husband has been keeping massive secrets from you. If he divorces you before you discover what they are, he walks away with everything. My mouth went dry. Discover what? What are you talking about? Marcus let out a heavy, stressed sigh. Look, I need to go, but I'll tell you this much. Brandon screwed up monumentally. If he sent that text before I could finalize everything on my end, then you still have a real shot at getting what you're legally owed. What am I owed? I pressed, but the line went dead. I stared at my phone in complete disbelief. I'd called expecting some cold, detached lawyer to walk me through divorce procedures. Instead, I got panic, fear, and cryptic warnings about secrets. My marriage wasn't just ending. It was a trap, and I'd been living inside it without knowing. I needed information, and I needed it fast. I scrolled through my contacts and called Rachel, Brandon's executive assistant. She'd worked for him for 5 years, practically ran his entire office, and while we weren't close friends, she'd always been kind to me at company events. If anyone knew what Brandon had been up to, it would be her. She answered on the third ring. Emma, hey, is everything okay? Her voice sounded surprised and cautious. Rachel, I need to ask you something important. Have you talked to Brandon today? Has he seemed off to you recently? I heard her hesitate. Define off, she said carefully. He texted me this morning saying he wants a divorce, I said bluntly. Out of nowhere. Said everything goes through his lawyer now. Rachel sucked in a sharp breath. Oh God. Oh no. That wasn't the reaction I expected. You knew something was coming, didn't you? I said. Rachel, please. I need to know what's been going on. She was quiet for a long moment, then finally spoke. He's been acting strange for weeks, Emma. Secret meetings that aren't on his official calendar. Making wire transfers to accounts I'd never seen before in all my time working here. And last week, I overheard him on the phone with someone. I don't know who, but he said something that made my skin crawl. What did he say? I asked, gripping my phone tighter. He said, once she signs the papers, it's all mine. She won't even know what she lost until it's way too late. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Once she signs, it's all mine. This wasn't just about ending our marriage. Brandon was trying to cut me out of something huge, something valuable, and he was doing it in a way that would leave me completely blindsided. I thanked Rachel and ended the call, my mind racing. I walked straight to Brandon's home office. He'd moved most of his work online, but he still kept physical files locked in his desk drawer. I knew the code. He'd never bothered changing it because he never thought I'd have a reason to look. I knelt down, punched in the numbers, and the drawer clicked open. Inside were stacks of financial statements, legal, documents, and bank records. My hands trembled as I sorted through them, and then I saw it. A bank statement for an account I'd never heard of before. The balance made me stop breathing. $8.6 million. And the account had only one name on it. Brandon's. I had to read that number 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. $8.6 million. Nearly $9 million sitting in an account I never knew existed, with only Brandon's name attached. I flipped through more pages with shaking hands, my pulse hammering in my ears. The transfers had been happening for over a year. Small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums, all moved systematically into this hidden account. Assets shifted, wealth concealed, and the whole time I'd been living my normal life, completely unaware that my husband was building a secret fortune designed to exclude me entirely. Everything Marcus said suddenly made perfect sense. Brandon wanted me to sign divorce papers before I ever found this account. He'd been planning his exit for months, maybe longer, moving money where I couldn't touch it, setting legal traps to keep me from what I was entitled to by law. And now I understood why Marcus had that instant panic in his voice when I called. He knew exactly what Brandon was hiding. He knew I was entitled to half of everything. And if Brandon had already filed those divorce papers claiming we had minimal assets, he'd probably assured Marcus that I was clueless and compliant, that I'd just sign whatever was put in front of me and disappear quietly. Except now I wasn't clueless anymore, and I sure as hell wasn't going to disappear. I grabbed my phone and called Marcus back. This time I wasn't asking questions. I was demanding answers. He picked up immediately. "Emma." His voice was tight. "You told me not to sign anything, not to talk to Brandon," I said, my voice ice cold and controlled. "You panicked when I called. Now I know exactly why. I found the secret bank account, Marcus. $8.6 million. So you're going to tell me everything. Right now." Silence. Then he exhaled sharply. "You found it." "Oh, I found it," I said. "And I'm assuming there's more. So start talking, Marcus, because I'm done being kept in the dark." "Emma, listen," he started. "No, you listen." I cut him off, so. Brandon tried to pull this off quietly. He thought I'd never notice, never question, never fight back. He planned to leave me with absolutely nothing while he walked away with millions. But now I know the truth. And you, Marcus? You knew all along. He cursed under his breath, then let out a long sigh. "Fine. You want the truth? Here it is. Brandon has been preparing for this divorce for over a year. He's been systematically shifting assets, moving money into offshore accounts, setting up legal barriers specifically designed to prevent you from touching a single cent." My jaw clenched. "Why?" I demanded. "Why not just be honest? Why go all this elaborate deception?" "Because he knew if you fought him in court, you'd win," Marcus said bluntly. "He knew you were entitled to half of everything by law. So his plan was to drag the divorce out, bury you in legal fees and paperwork until you got exhausted, and then you'd accept some tiny settlement just to make it stop." I felt sick. Let me guess, he was going to tell the court that the money was entirely his, that he earned it alone, that I contributed nothing to our marriage financially. Marcus didn't answer, which was answer enough. "He was going to lie under oath," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "He was going to commit perjury to steal from me." "Emma," Marcus said carefully, "what your husband is doing isn't just unethical. It's illegal. This is financial fraud. If you take this evidence to court, a judge will see right through his scheme." I closed my eyes, letting that word sink in. Fraud. This wasn't just about assets anymore. Brandon could face serious legal consequences for what he'd done. "Marcus," I said slowly, "you're his lawyer. Why are you telling me all this?" He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Because your husband is an arrogant idiot who doesn't listen. I warned him this plan was illegal. I told him that if you ever found out, it would explode in his face spectacularly. But Brandon thought he was untouchable. He thought you'd just cry for a few weeks and sign whatever papers he put in front of you." Marcus paused. I guess he forgot who he married. Despite everything, I felt a grim smile cross my face. That's where he made his biggest mistake. "Emma," Marcus said, his voice serious now. "I shouldn't be saying this, but if you play your cards right, you could destroy him completely." My grip tightened on the phone. "Keep talking." "You have something more powerful than money," he explained. "You have proof. Bank statements, transfer records, documentation of hidden funds. If you bring this evidence to court, the judge won't just rule in your favor. Brandon could face criminal charges for financial fraud." "Meaning what exactly?" I asked. "Meaning Brandon won't just lose the money. He'll lose his reputation, his career, potentially his freedom. And you'll walk away with far more than just half." I sat there for a moment, processing everything. I'd loved Brandon once. I'd built a life with him, trusted him, believed in our future together. But after everything he'd done, every lie he'd told, every dollar he'd hidden, every bit of faith he'd betrayed, I felt nothing but cold determination. I'd always tried to be fair, to do the right thing, to play by the rules. But Brandon had torn up the rulebook the moment he sent that text. Now I was going to win. And I was going to make absolutely sure he paid for every single thing he'd done. I hung up with Marcus and immediately started securing evidence. I photographed every single page in that drawer, every bank statement, every transfer record, every piece of documentation that proved what Brandon had done. I sent copies to 3 different places: my personal email, a secure cloud storage account, and directly to Rachel. I typed out a message to her with the files attached. Rachel, I need you to hold on to these. If anything happens to me or my access to this information gets cut off somehow, send everything to Marcus Bennett immediately. Can you do that for me? Her response came back within 30 seconds. Emma, what the hell? He was hiding this much money? Oh my God. I typed back quickly. Yep, and now I'm going to make him pay for it. Another pause, then. Whatever you need, I've got your back completely. I exhaled slowly. Good, because I was about to start a war. I knew Brandon was staying at his company's executive penthouse downtown. He'd been avoiding me, probably assuming that by the time I received the official divorce paperwork, I'd be too emotionally destroyed to fight. But he'd severely underestimated me. I grabbed the bank statements, shoved them into my bag, and drove straight to the building. The doorman recognized me from company events and waved me through without question. I rode the elevator up to the top floor, my heart pounding but my mind crystal clear. When I reached the door, I didn't knock. I used the keycard Brandon had given me months ago, the one he'd apparently forgotten to deactivate. The door clicked open and I walked straight in. Brandon was sitting on the leather couch, whiskey glass in hand, looking completely relaxed, like he hadn't just tried to ruin my entire life. When he saw me, his face twisted into immediate annoyance. Emma, he said, setting his glass down with a deliberate clink. What the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to go through Marcus. I walked forward calmly and dropped the stack of bank statements onto the coffee table in front of him. They fanned out across the surface, numbers and account details clearly visible. Brandon glanced down at them, then back up at me, and I watched all the color drain from his face. Where did you get those? He asked, his voice suddenly much quieter. I crossed my arms. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? He forced out a laugh, but it sounded hollow and desperate. Emma, you don't understand the situation. Oh, I understand perfectly. I cut him off sharply. I understand that while I was being a loyal, loving wife, you were secretly funneling millions of dollars into an account with only your name on it. I understand that you thought you could file for divorce, leave me with nothing, and walk away without any consequences. His jaw clenched. This is none of your damn business. I actually laughed at that, but there was zero humor in it. None of my business? We're married, Brandon. That means half of everything you have is legally mine. That's not an opinion. That's the law. His eyes went dark. Not if I can prove the money was mine alone before the marriage. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. And how exactly do you think a judge is going to react when they see these? I tapped the papers with one finger. Transfers made during our marriage. Accounts you never disclosed to me. Money you were legally required to share. His face contorted with rage. You have no proof that I have plenty of proof. I interrupted again. Bank records, transfer documentation, dates and amounts, and more importantly? I smiled coldly. I have Marcus. He froze completely. For the first time, I saw actual fear flash across his face. Marcus wouldn't. He stammered. Oh, but he did, I said, my smile widening. Your own lawyer told me everything. How you planned this for over a year. How you were going to lie in court. How you thought you could drag things out until I gave up and accepted some pathetic settlement. Brandon's hand curled into a fist. That goddamn idiot, he hissed. That idiot knows you screwed up, I shot back. He knows I have a legal right to half of everything you tried to hide. And he knows that what you did isn't just unethical. It's fraud. For a long moment, Brandon said nothing. He just stared at me with this mixture of rage and disbelief, like he couldn't quite process that I'd figured everything out. Then his lips curled into an ugly sneer. You think you've won? His voice was low and dangerous. This isn't over, Emma. Not even close. I picked up the papers from the table and walked toward the door. When I reached it, I turned back one last time. You're right, Brandon, I said calmly. It's not over. It's just getting started. Then I walked out, leaving him alone in his expensive penthouse to drown in the mess he'd created for himself. And for the first time since that horrible text message, I felt something like hope. The morning after our confrontation, I walked straight into Marcus Bennett's office. He looked up from his desk, rubbing his temples like he already knew this was going to be a long day. Emma, he sighed. I figured you'd be back. I dropped a thick folder onto his desk, the one I'd spent all night organizing with every piece of evidence I'd collected. You told me I could ruin him, I said coolly. Let's make absolutely sure that happens. Marcus's eyes flicked down to the documents. He slowly opened the folder and started scanning the pages. I watched his expression harden as he took in the full scope of what Brandon had done. You've been busy, he muttered. I don't waste time, I replied. He closed the folder and sat back in his chair. All right, let me be completely clear about what this means. Brandon isn't just looking at losing money. He's looking at possible fraud charges. I nodded. Good. Marcus continued. If we take this to court, he's finished. Not only will you get your half, but the judge will take into account his deliberate attempts to hide assets. That means he could end up paying you substantially more than just the standard 50%. I smiled. Even better. Emma, Marcus said carefully. Brandon is going to fight this with everything he has. Desperate men do stupid things. I leaned forward. So will desperate women. And I'm done playing nice. That afternoon, we filed a comprehensive legal motion against Brandon. Not just for divorce, but for fraud, financial misconduct, and intentional deception with malicious intent. The paperwork hit the court system like a bomb. It didn't take long for the news to reach Brandon. My phone rang within an hour, an unknown number. I picked up. Are you out of your mind? Brandon's voice exploded through the speaker, absolutely furious. I smirked. Hi, honey. Missed me already? You filed fraud charges? Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you're doing? I know exactly what I'm doing, Brandon, I said, my voice like ice. I'm taking what's legally mine. You wanted everything to go through lawyers, so I made it official. I could hear him breathing hard, barely keeping his rage under control. You have no idea what you've started. Oh, I think I do, I replied calmly. This is justice, and you played yourself. The line went dead. 2 weeks later, we were in court. Brandon had managed to hire some slick, expensive lawyer who clearly thought this would be an easy win. He was very wrong. When the judge reviewed the bank statements, the transfer records, and the hidden accounts, his entire demeanor shifted from routine proceedings to serious concern. Mr. Carter, the judge said, narrowing his eyes over his reading glasses. Would you care to explain why you failed to disclose these substantial assets during your initial divorce filing? Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his expensive suit suddenly looking like it didn't fit quite right. Your Honor, those funds were accumulated before the marriage began. Marcus stood up smoothly. Your Honor, these transfers began 13 months ago, well within the marriage timeline. That makes them joint marital assets, and my client is entitled to her fair share. The judge nodded slowly, making notes. I stole a glance at Brandon. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He was losing, and he knew it. Then Marcus delivered the final strike. Your Honor, given the deliberate and systematic attempt to hide assets, deceive the court, and defraud my client, we're also requesting punitive damages. Brandon's lawyer jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. Overruled, the judge said sharply, not even looking up from the documents. He turned to Brandon with an expression of clear disapproval. Mr. Carter, based on the evidence presented, I'm inclined to rule in favor of Mrs. Carter. Not only will she receive half of all marital assets, but given your documented attempt to commit financial fraud, she's entitled to additional compensation as a penalty. Brandon's hands curled into fists on the table. I watched as the judge delivered his full ruling. Brandon would lose everything. Not just half. More. Because of his own greed, his own arrogance, his own certainty that he could outsmart everyone. The court adjourned. I gathered my things and walked into the hallway, feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, I heard footsteps. "Emma." Brandon's voice was hoarse, broken. I turned to face him. He looked hollow, like a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse. "Don't do this," he muttered. "You already got what you wanted." I studied him for a long moment, this man I'd once loved, who'd betrayed me so thoroughly. Then I leaned in close and whispered, "No, Brandon. You got exactly what you deserved." His face twisted with anguish. I walked away and didn't look back. Over the following weeks, I watched Brandon's empire crumble spectacularly. Word spread fast in his industry. Investors pulled out, clients stopped trusting him. His reputation was destroyed. He had to sell the penthouse. And through Rachel, I learned he'd had a mistress the entire time. She left him the second his money disappeared, blocking his number and moving on to wealthier targets. Brandon had sacrificed everything for her, and she'd given him nothing. As for me, I bought my dream home. Not some flashy penthouse, but a beautiful, peaceful place that actually felt like home. I was free. One morning, sipping coffee on my porch, I got a text from Brandon. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a moment, then typed back. "No need. I've already said everything worth saying. Have a good life, Brandon." Then I blocked his number forever.